Perfect. We are live.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophia. Hello, good evening, fellow commissioners. Hello, Portland, and welcome everyone to the mapping work group meeting of the Independent District Commission. Today is Tuesday, August 8th, and we will be meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. virtually via Zoom. Commissioners, it's good to see you and welcome to members of the public joining us this evening. Before we get started with our meeting tonight, I want to pass things off to our city staff to go over some Zoom meeting logistics.
Thank you. And that's me. Hi, everyone. So for our Zoom meeting logistics, so everyone knows this meeting is being recorded for later viewing. A copy of the recording will be posted on the Independent District Commission's website under past meetings and events. For today's meetings, we have closed captioning available. To access that, press on the closed captioning button at the bottom right of your screen. Commissioners, this is your reminder to please change your Zoom chat setting to everyone so folks listening along today can follow along with your conversation. And lastly, at this meeting, we won't have public comment. The public comment for the Independent District Commission closed on July 22nd. However, if you have any questions, we do have the Zoom Q&A feature available today during the meeting. Please feel free to put any questions or comments there. And then, of course, we also have our email address where you can send additional questions, and that's districtcommission@portlandoregon.gov. And with that, I'll pass it back to our co-chairs. Thanks.
I'm actually not able to switch my chat to everyone. The only option I have is host and panelists.
Ooh, let me fix that. All right, thank you. There we go. Did that work?
I think
Yep,
we had
sure.
the same issue for Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins. Sophia.
Okay, that should have changed it for everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, that looks like it's working now. Thank you, Sophia. So commissioners, this is our agenda for the evening. We will begin by spending the first 20 minutes on some of the themes that have come up in our discussions that'll help inform some of the technical mapping work, which will be the bulk of our agenda tonight from 6:25 to 7:55. We will close out with next steps in the lead up to our full commission meeting tomorrow evening. Next slide, please. So just to kind of recap, so our last meeting, we really focused on recapping our overall community engagement to date. We received and reflected on our public comment analysis and engaged in a discussion around where we still felt we had consensus and where we thought we could focus more of our deliberation going forward with regard to some of the map themes and features that we've been grappling with here. So, that meeting last week was really meant to help ground and align us on our next steps towards adopting a district plan. So tonight's work group meeting is really that intention to take that next step in that process. And I'll hand it over here to Commissioner Judd for some additional comments as well.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Good to see everyone again, particularly on the backside of all of the community engagement work that we've done. And it feels uncomfortable now to be not sitting next to several of you during this conversation as we've become very close over the past month or so. It has been an enriching experience to reach out to and have a conversation with many of the community members. I just want to take a quick moment to sort of aggregate a lot of that thinking and observations that we had so far. So if we tonight, what we want to do as Commissioner Loretta mentioned, we want to come together to talk about where those tensions are that exist in the creation of the maps, and underlying that again is these notions of what's equitable in terms of representation. And so that being kind of the frame in which we're going through this, there's several questions we want to make sure that we keep in the back of our minds as we go through this process. One is that, and we heard a lot of reflections on this in the community engagement. What do we actually have to drive our decisions? And so as we've talked about, we have the voter requirements, we have the statutory environment that we exist in terms of the laws governing the Voting Rights Acts and the amendments. And then we also have, obviously, the community engagement, and then the data that we have, the census data that we have within the tools. So that's clear. We also have some additional research that we did in terms of asset management and arguments there. But that's what we have. There's just as we go through this process, we also can be mindful of things that we actually don't have. There were some voices that we weren't able to aggregate and to pull together in this process. So we want to be mindful of those missing inputs as well. What are the limitations of the current data set that we have? We talked about the fact that this data set is this decennial data, and so we've had elections since then. That we could have had some data aggregated from there, but that might not be immediately available for us. So we have to be, again, aware of what the limitations are within the inputs that we have available to us. We also, one of the inputs that we didn't really have a luxury of is a lot of time to really go through a really in-depth process, but we made use of the time we have and the resources we had available to us. But we also know that, again, in terms of community engagement, there were some great opportunities that we want to pass on to those folks who are continuing this work after we finish our mapping. And then we have your collective experiences within the community engagement. So we rely upon that this evening to pull together the tactical mapping that needs to be done in order for us to make a decision over the next couple of weeks. We will always obviously follow this process of consensus building, and as we get through and as we get to the meat of developing the maps, I think it's gonna be important for us to really be able to articulate what it is that we're trying to solve, particularly as we start talking about where the issues are crossing the river. What actually are we really trying to solve there? And really be able to articulate that, because that will actually, as we go through that, solving that problem, we're going to be able to build the rationale that will support ultimately our decision. And again, we do feel as if, as a collective, that those rationales were one of the things that we heard a lot about from the community engagement, but those are important to bring those along with us and be able to explain that. And we want to be able to deliver that with the final map. Additionally, we want to thank Flo for their work, sort of helping us this evening. Some of you have already seen our ability, the layers that were created. We will get into that in a little bit. The layers that were created to help us really get to a better understanding of these issues of, again, what does it mean from homeowners versus renters, and tackling that question? What is it in looking at the underrepresented and socioeconomic issues? There's a layer in the data set that we'll leverage to help us understand that. And then also in terms of representation, which is kind of an overarching theme, what does it mean when we pull the weightings of different communities together? When we pull the weightings of different communities together, what does it mean for certain well-defined areas of common interest in terms of their ability to have representation equitably? So we want to keep those things in our minds as we go through this process. And obviously that will help us as we finish this evening. That will give us not just the directional maps to take back to the IDC for the broader commission, but also give us leave us with those rationales that we will continue to build off of, and supply that along with the maps at the end of our time together in September. Any questions so far? Excellent. We will take silence as well. I won't even count to 7 as we did in community engagements. Let's just get into it. I'll turn it back over to Autumn for the mapping session.
Thank you. So we're going to start with just a kind of an alignment discussion, just to make sure that we're all aligned around the themes from the public comments and reflecting on some of the takeaways towards the end of last week's session with the full commission around just themes that were noticed in the public comment, direction for this group from a mapping perspective, and how to reconcile them. And then before we actually get into live mapping, I also wanted to be sure we took some time to agree on just an approach to how to actually wrestle with these maps. So for instance, so as a reminder for the commission and the public, the commission voted to set aside Cedar for the time being, and to focus on the Alder and Maple maps as a basis, and to really focus on revising those, either one or both, to come prepared and have this work group come prepared to tomorrow's meeting with a proposed map for just consideration and deliberation by the full body. So we're just going to recap those themes and then focus on things to consider, and then also think about how we want to approach today. So just a quick recap, and we'll open it to just discussion for any kind of uplifting or expansions upon ideas. We want to work to keep neighborhood boundaries intact while balancing the population to the extent feasible. Encourage in our mapping, encourage citywide collaboration, achieve a sufficient consensus on a final map within the independent district commission. So in this sense, as a mapping work group, we'd like to be working towards that, something you can actually pass this body. Avoid asset packing, and then consider the map's potential impact on renter communities as a whole, while recognizing the differences within and among those communities. And then just a synthesis of those themes, especially for those with the comments and just themes that came out of the deliberation. We're really considering in this work tonight, renter representation and the implications there. Looking at central city revitalization as a dynamic, promoting district collaboration. Again, avoiding asset packing, and then considering, what it means to have equitable representation. So I'm going to pause there and say, like, one, those themes are resonating, and if there are specific areas of focus that this group would like to address tonight.
Commissioner Manhattan has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Manhattan. There we go. Okay, now, sorry, Commissioner Manhattan, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, just a question, clarification on the first part that you mentioned. My understanding from the last conversation is that we would use the two maps as reference points and then would start sort of working on one as a more of a collaborative map as opposed to tweaking those ones. So I just wanted to confirm my understanding of that.
So I would like just this group to confirm that. So, right, for instance, which map would you like to start with? Let's just get an agreement there. If you'd like to address kind of both maps separately and then look at each individually and then move more to a consensus, or just, for instance, like to start with one of the maps and then consider different factors from the other that you'd like to incorporate. So I'd like that to be a discussion and agreement here. But yes, that was the general consensus, right? Start with Alder, Maple. But then it was then kind of like how you do that is really up to the next group to figure out in practice. So that would be my question to you all. Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins.
One of the things that I've been wrestling with, and I have been working on multiple iterations of Alder to try and capture some of the things that came up routinely in public comments. Some are small items, others are larger. And I kept coming back to whether or not we had certain agreements that were still in effect that affect what we can do with the maps. So I had sent a note earlier today wanting to just kind of memorialize, if these are still accurate, that we had agreed that the East District that includes the 4 non-public Portland Public School districts would be its own district. We had agreed to maintain historic Albina, which includes the Lloyd District and Sullivan's Gulch in the North-Northeast District. We had agreed to maintain the area west of the Willamette in a single district. We had agreed to maintain St. John's area in the North-Northeast District. So I think both Kari and I, because Kari's also done a lot of work on Maple in the same respects, those are important things for us to have agreed on because they have a dramatic effect on what opportunities there are to change the maps. There's a big domino effect that happens if any of those change. So I guess that's one of the things I would like to get clarity on.
Thank you, Commissioner. I would like to, so I think we should probably focus on getting agreement around those as the starting points to see if those are carrying over, and still kind of post comment period, if those are still resonating. I've noted all of them. I'm going to touch base with the other 3 commissioners with their hands up, and then we can kind of synthesize all of these items. That sounds right. Commissioner Chisholm?
Yeah, I just want to start by thanking everyone. I was not at the last full commission meeting. I watched the entire thing, set aside my Netflix for an evening, and watched it all. You were a thrilling entertainment, and read all the stuff. So I'm caught up on the meeting. I also want to thank Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins. She and I had a chance to work together yesterday, and really sort of thought about the sort of feedback we got from the public in 2 kind of buckets. There's a little tiny stuff, move this street, adjust this boundary kind of stuff. And then there's the big questions, right? Which between Alder and Maple are really about what goes with the west side. Is it Central City, Buckman, Kearns, Hosford, Abernathy, or is it Selwood, Eastmoreland? And what we've posted available to the public on Districtor is now Maple 3 and Alder 4, which are 2 maps that are derivative of the original Alder and Maple, but are a bunch of little small changes. At some point, Sharon, we should probably review all of those folks, but a bunch of little tiny changes. And then make sure that the 2 maps are harmonized on all of those little tiny changes. So there's the only difference at this point now between Alder 4 and Maple 3 is the big question, Central City versus Selwood. And so I just wanted to make sure that everyone here is up to speed on that, and that the public is watching us is on that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. So to just synthesize, there's been some kind of individual work offline to try to bring the current iterations of Alder and Maple more into a consistent basis, so that really highlighting those bigger picture themes and kind of tensions that the commission is wrestling with. And that could be on the table to have presented, for instance, to kind of kick us off with that mapping discussion. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Judd, followed by Commissioner Manjarres.
Yeah, to that end, I'm just wondering if Alex, as we have this discussion right now, is it possible for us to pull up, there was a site where we had all 3 maps, and actually if you chose the 2 maps, you could actually overlay them. At least what that will allow us to do is have a visual to be able to understand where there is harmony, and then that will also allow us to really focus in on where's there the greatest amount of tension to help prioritize the conversation. Does that make sense, Alex?
Cool. It does. I'm actually getting that ready in the background right now. So as
Good.
soon as you guys say go, I'll share my screen at some point. We can do some different visualizations to see differences between Alder as it was as a draft map versus Alder 4 or Maple and Maple 3, or maybe any other variations you guys want to see.
Cool.
And if that works, just under the general process, just throwing it out, we don't have to agree. But like at this point, if as you're doing that, Alex, perhaps if it's Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins and Commissioner Chisholm, that perhaps either or, that one will kind of walk us through the thinking, that could be helpful too, just so we're all following along. Commissioner Manjarres.
Yes, thank you. That was a great suggestion. Thank you, Commissioner Judd, for asking for that. And just again, just to be extra clear, want to make sure that we're starting with the baseline maps as the public commented on, and not the revised versions that were created yesterday, just so that we can walk through each change and it's successive and all of us are following along. The other piece that I did want to also elevate in relation to what Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins mentioned is I do think there was a lot of agreement before we went into the community engagement around the East Side District and some of the other components that were mentioned. I did dissent when it came to the full West Side District, and I know there was an amendment to that motion at that time to say, well, we were going to do it for purposes of getting to 3 maps. I'm not sure at this point if I would support taking tweaking the West Side off the table at this stage if it was necessary. But the other pieces I do support. So I just wanted to confirm that and say that if necessary, it does become a point of time. I don't see it actually being an issue right now if we layer these maps over, but I'm not comfortable taking that off the table, given what we heard during the public comment period, and also considering where we're trying to go in terms of the themes that were brought up during the last meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner. And are there, well, my other comments, especially as it comes to like kind of focusing how we approach tonight and thinking about those bigger themes, Commissioner Chisholm?
If I remember correctly, maybe somebody can pull the minutes up. We had a 13-0 consensus on the east side, 13-0 consensus on the west side, 13-0 consensus on historic Albina, and I believe it was an 11-2 vote on whether to reject the idea of St. John's being the thing we add to the west side. Is that everyone else's recollection?
And I believe you're citing prior votes from before the public comment period, correct?
Yes, correct. Yes, correct.
And I think the initial question from Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins was, I think, like, to what extent do those prior agreements still hold post comment period? And in the last meeting, there was some discussion, I think, based on some of the public comments where people were asking, is it feasible to create a district that is, the West, or what would splitting it look like? And Commissioner Brown, I don't want to interpret it, but I did see you nodding your head. That sounds about right. Okay. And if anyone has a different recollection, we can also check the minutes too. Commissioner Valdini?
Just regarding where I am with this, I am uncomfortable with changing the maps in any dramatic way. And that means that I want to keep the west side whole, just because we can't go back to the public for comment. And I just don't feel comfortable making dramatic changes at this stage. I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Baldini. And then I think Commissioner Wise and Commissioner Kimura, we haven't heard from either of you, so if you want to jump in, please do so. If not, Commissioner Chisholm.
Arlene Lamar?
Oh, sorry.
Arlene, go ahead.
Sorry, Commissioner Kimura, I kind of see you coming off mute. I'll let you, yeah, go for it.
I think the greatest tension, as Commissioner Baldini says, is we got comment on the maps we had. How do we reconcile the comments that we had with the maps we had? And I understand that there were other suggestions, but at this point, I too am a little uncomfortable with going with a dramatically different style of mapping, but how do we take into account the comments we did hear so that it more reflects what we heard? And I guess even if we did a what if, I don't know that we would come up with any different solutions than we did, but I think it's worth considering. And I'm not the map person, the flow folks are the map people. So I think we need to look at that before we actually say, hey, that really is not what I agreed to, or that is what I agreed to. But given the understanding that we put out maps out there and we've got to go with the comments we received on those maps that we put out. And if there's anything going to be really radical, which I'm not sure it is, but we could always consider that. There is no way that we can go back to the people and say, hey, this is a second iteration. We got to comment because we've got to deliver this product or have City Council decide that in basically 2 weeks. So I just want to make sure that we are all kind of mindful of that. But I do want to see the iterations and see what tweaks we can make without compromising our process. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we'll hear from Commissioner Judd and then Commissioner Chisholm. If there are any other comments, we can definitely take them, but it might be a good time to just start maybe overlaying those two Maple and Alder maps, just to kind of set the tone. Set the basis for how we're going to work, and then kind of decide how we navigate it going forward, if that sounds right. Okay, Commissioner Judd, followed by Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, I think it's, I think you're right. I was encourage us to get to it. I think the other thing is that let's be mindful of language and triggering language. I think if we talk about dramatic and radical, that without having seen anything, it makes it kind of a ominous task. I think the other thing is that if we don't allow community engagement to influence us, it questions why we actually had in community engagement. And so I think we do need to understand what the charge was from community members, make that thoughtful consideration, but then ultimately have and this is why we talk about the values and the themes, well, the values separately from the actual administrative task of drawing the map, because at the end of the day, it's those values that we're going to have to be able to fall back on and say, these are the reasons why we actually made these types of decisions. And again, reflective and thoughtful of the limitations that we have in terms of we don't have unlimited time, we don't have unlimited resources, and as Commissioner Kimura just indicated, we do have an urgency about this task that we have to be very mindful of as well. And so I think it's a matter of let's get through the work. Let's be mindful of why, if we're going to make a change, what will ultimately be the justification for it, and the trade-offs that we're making with it, so that we all get to the same rationale as we make these changes and referring back to these values that we talked about.
Thank you, Commissioner Judd. Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, I do think we need to be very mindful of the public engagement process we've just gone through. That is, to me, where our legitimacy comes from. I think one of the things that was really striking about the public comment report, as you all remarked on Wednesday's meeting, is the vast majority of the comments we got were from Southeast. And that is almost certainly because that was the question we presented to the public. 3 maps, all aligned on the western part of the city, all aligned on the eastern part of the city, almost entirely aligned on the northern part of the city, and a big question about Southeast. And then we got lots of feedback from Southeast. I think it would be, I certainly would be very troubled if we were to go back now and produce a map that breaks apart our east side or breaks apart the west, or doesn't hold faith with historic Albina, because we didn't explicitly ask for feedback and then therefore didn't receive it from communities in those areas. We had a few people here and there who offered up suggestions of various kinds for different kinds of maps, radical or otherwise. But for the most part, what we did not hear was, y'all are crazy, give us a new map. They were commenting on the maps we gave them in large part. So my view basically is we need to do the tiny little adjustments to hear the feedback and react to it that various neighborhoods have asked for. And then we need to wrestle with the tough question of Maple versus Alder, Central City versus Sellwood, and then pass this on and be done. Otherwise, I think we're going to be in a position we're going to hand off to City Council, and Lord knows what will happen there.
Thank you to all the commissioners. Before we move into live mapping, I did want to pull up the final slide, Sophia, from the discussion session. That was the mapping, just like some of the framing questions. Or something, guys. I really threw that on you. Commissioner Chisholm, don't take a break and start watching Stranger Things. All right, there we go. All right, so here's a synthesis from the questions that this is synthesizing where we landed last Wednesday. So kind of the core tensions. And then I wanted to revisit at least the four areas of agreements that Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins raised earlier in the session. But there's basically the kind of core question, where should, and I suppose to amend that would be like, should the Western District cross the river, right? Like, it really is where should. Does Alder or Maple better serve renters? In what district should Buckman, Kearns, and then Selwyn, Eastmoreland be included, assuming that those neighbors are kept kind of together? And then what are the specific boundaries? So just kind of like reaffirming, this was a big piece, reaffirming some of those kind of key boundaries that folks are looking at, including neighborhood boundaries for Brooklyn, Rose City Park, Hollywood, Roseway, and Montebello, and then other considerations. And then Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins raised some of the kind of the prior agreements and the discussions that kind of grounded the initial development of those three maps. And those included keeping an East District with the non-PPS schools in one single district, maintaining historic Albina as within a single district, maintaining west of the Willamette, and I know that that's already been a point of discussion today, but maintaining everything west of the Willamette in a district, as well as everything east of the 205. And then, of course, maintaining St. John's as part of an eastern district, and specifically, I believe Commissioner Robbins, you talked about that the north stretch. Okay, so just wanted to synthesize those before we get to the actual kind of like starting to enter the mapping process. Anything to add? And I know that we have a question here. Anything else beyond what's already been raised tonight?
I mean, I don't know if you partially got to it earlier, Autumn, which is like for the renters part of this, I feel like I struggle with it because I feel like not all, there are lots of different types of renters. Like there are more affluent renters, and there are folks like I'm in East Portland, like there are folks that are struggling to make their rent out here. So I just, I guess I just want to keep that in mind, like that, with my organizer brain, I think about like, okay, the importance of talking about renters is in a way to highlight them as like in a way as, or could be an organized group. And I think I have I just know I struggle in my mind just trying to like figure out if, besides them being renters, are there things that are actually like bringing them together? Like, is there organization? Is there someone that is unifying them in a way? And so I think I just still have those outstanding questions, not to say I'm like making a decision off of that, but I just kind of wanted to put it out there as like what's going on in my brain.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I think you are hitting on like that kind of key tension that we talked about earlier, right? What constitutes a community of interest, and like what are the differences and similarities and within and among those groups, right? Commissioner Manjarres.
I just want to second what Commissioner Wise just mentioned. And also, I feel like we had some data around this before we went into the community engagement process. And my sense, again, organizer brained, is that we don't speak on behalf of people. And I'd actually be curious about how many folks here are actually currently renters. And I don't want to be in a position where I'm speaking on behalf of folks. If we're going to speak to that particular issue, I would like to go, and I mentioned this in the Google Doc that was put out, going back to specific examples in the record of renters actually saying, I want to be part of the West Side for XYZ reasons. I think it's going to be really important. I do remember hearing from Kat, who do organize and engage directly with renters, saying that they didn't want that. So I don't want us to be in a position where we're speaking outside of our own experience. And I think that's really important and a value that we should hold as we get into those kinds of questions. So that's one where I also have heartburn, even diving into the context of that, because we have data, and data is one piece, and then there's how you make meaning of the data. And there's an element of self-determination that I think that I want to hold ourselves accountable to, as opposed to saying, well, I think they think that, so I want to bring that up because I have some trouble with that as well.
Yeah, and we do have some data overlays and analysis of different maps as it relates to the, sorry, renter population versus homeowner population across the maps too. I think we can walk through that for sure. Are we ready to start? Maybe just start with that overlay. Alex, if you're ready with the original Alder and the original Maple maps as they were presented to the public.
Yeah, definitely. Can you all give me a thumbs up if you see my screen? The map? Great. So this is the app that was put out so that we could see the statistics and the districtor versions of this. So starting with Alder, has the text down here, but I'll just kind of say generally so we can get reacquainted with Alder. This was the map that has a west of the Willamette district that crosses into Selwood and is connected by the Ross Island and Selwood bridges. Also includes City College. On the east side, you have all the non-PPS school districts. Boundaries are 205 and 82nd. And then in the middle, it was using 84 as a boundary. And then the neighborhood boundaries of Rose City Park and Roseway. Down here, we have Montevilla Neighborhood Association is split slightly, but that's to respect the J District, part of the East Side District here. There's any questions about that one? Just let us linger on that for a second. I'll switch over to Maple. So Maple, in comparison, we still have the same East Side District here with the same boundaries, being 205 and 82nd. The main differences are the boundary between that northeast district and the southeast district. Instead of using just neighborhood boundaries here, we can see that I can turn on a couple different layers to highlight this point. Is the neighborhood boundaries and Sandy are being used. So neighborhood organizations now in kind of that blue purple color. We see how 84 is used, and it has Rose City Park included in the teal district, but then it uses Sandy, which splits the Roseway neighborhood association between those two. And then the other major difference is we have a west of the Willamette district, but the difference of where it crosses over the east side is instead of crossing over down southeast with Selwood, Reed, Westmoreland, is it crosses over in central east side to pick up Kearns, Buckman, down until the Ross Island Bridge and Powell Boulevard.
Can you do us a favor? Thank you for that overview. Can you do us a favor? Can you, under layers, click both Alder and Maple? That will give us an overlay.
Yeah.
And I think we can then have a discussion on where we want to prioritize. And if I could cheat a bit, based upon the conversation we had last time, does everyone feel comfortable starting discussion on the question of where should the west side cross the river?
So I also wanted to recognize Commissioner Chisholm did have his hand up as well. Commissioner Chisholm, do you want to jump in? And then Commissioner Baldini, and then maybe we focus in on this question around where to start the conversation.
Yeah, I think I would actually like to see us layer Alder and Alder 4, and then have Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins walk us through those changes, because I think they're relatively minor and non-controversial. And then we can walk it through Maple and Maple 3, which are almost entirely the same choices with a few exceptions. And then hopefully we can spend our time talking about Maple 3 and Alder 4, which I think are slightly better, closer to perfected versions. And then we can get to the big question, which Commissioner Judd has talked about, which is where do we cross the river? But let's talk about the prison up in Thunder Leaf, and let's talk about the Alderton Wall scenario, and the Sandy Boulevard question. Let's talk about the little stuff. Just check those boxes. I think they're relatively easy to check off, and then we can focus our time on the big question rather than spending our time talking about the original Maple and Alder.
And so the two proposals are look at the reconcile, kind of start with just a broader discussion around where the west side should cross the river versus reconciling the two maps, creating essentially one new base map and then, or one shared base map for all intents and purposes, with a question of where to cross the river. Commissioner Valdini and then Commissioner Manhattan.
Yeah, I wanted to echo that and just say, I think that our hardest question to answer is going to be where to cross the river, and that, frankly, I think we should probably save that for when we have the full committee. I think our job is to do sort of smaller things, but I don't feel like we could really answer that big question until we're all back together again tomorrow, but I may be mistaken. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Manhattan.
Yeah, instead of going to new maps, can I make a request that the two folks who worked on the maps yesterday actually just build the new map as we go? So reference the maps that they each worked on, and they can talk, basically have Alex sort of add to it. It's just visually really hard for me to toggle between the maps as we go. It would be really helpful for me, and I think for the public also, if we can make those changes in real time. So whether it's starting with either map, Alder, and just making those tweaks, or maybe we have Van Sickle Robbins go first, and then if there are other maps that Commissioner Chisholm, or smaller tweaks that Commissioner Chisholm has on his map that is different than hers, then we can go from there. But it would be helpful if we took it a step at a time, for me, from a new map.
Agreed.
Thank you, Commissioner. And sorry, Commissioner Chisholm, I think you jumped in to say I agree. Okay. Commissioner Van Sickle Robbins.
I was just going to say, Alex, what is easier for you to change the Alder, or for me to explain on Alder 4? Because the changes are minimal.
Presenting the changes that you've already made might be easier, and I wouldn't mind starting there, but I do see value in the suggestion to walk through the changes live, because I think we can make them pretty quick. So if that's agreeable to all, maybe we could go that route. And if I may, right now, what's showing on my screen now, I think is originally what Commissioner Judd asked for, is to see Alder and Maple draft maps overlaid with each other. So instead of having the colors for both of them, which kind of is not great for like color gradient to see the differences with our eyes, I have Alder is the red boundaries or maroon boundaries, and then that leaves the Maple map to be in color. So just real quick before we jump into the other iterations, there's not a difference on the east side district. You can see how the red boundary is coincident with the green district. So the changes between Alder and Maple in the northeast area are along Sandy, and it's the division of the Rose, not Rose City Park, but Rose Way neighborhood right here. So you can see how this area is either part of the teal district in Alder, or as we're seeing here, it's part of the orange district with Maple.
And also over there where there is green in Alder, I used the whole neighborhood there because they all go to McDaniel's High School. So I cross over to capture all of that neighborhood.
All right.
So Alex, and Commissioner, I think Commissioner Kimura, are you trying to jump in?
What I would also like to see is, I understand what you did and it seems pretty clear. What does that do to our population variation? Because
For
don't we
which-
have to stay within, if you made these changes, which when we're going to probably do it with the other version as well. If you made these changes, what would it do to the population? In other words, currently, if you went with the red outlines, as opposed to the original outlines we presented, what's the difference in the population? And can we look at it as a side by side? In other words, the green district would have 154,000 and the new green district would have 152,000 or something like that, because the mapping is visually clear, but we also have to take into account the population number.
Yep, we can definitely show that. And just to be clear, we're not showing changes right now to Alder or Maple. We're just comparing Alder and Maple with these
Right.
two things. And I can, yeah, as we go through it, feel free to say, I want to see the stats, I want to see the map, and I'll switch over to either one. So then as I described, as I went through Alder and Maple originally, the main changes where they cross the Willamette. So you can see how Maple includes the Selwood and Eastmoreland area with the southeast, whereas in Alder, that red boundary goes all the way out to capture those. They're part of the West District. So I think if we understand the differences between Alder and Maple, Autumn, I'll pass over to you if you think we should show Alder versus Alder 4.
And I think if we start with Alder, and I believe Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins, Alder is the map that you were kind of focused on altering to bring into alignment. You could present that, and it sounds like, Alex, you would be able to make almost like replicate the changes in real time as the commissioner is walking through. If that, is there any opposition? And sorry, Commissioner Manhattan, I did see your hand. I just wanted to gauge if there's any opposition.
Yeah, I just want to, thank you so much. I just want to absolutely clarify my request because I feel like I'm not saying it correctly, but I would like to walk through each change one at a time. So I don't want to like layer maps over each other because it's going to be really hard for me to track. If we can just talk through each one, and if we do have some question or concern, we can actually bring it up one at a time as opposed to just layering a bunch of different changes at the same time. So
Yeah.
Alex, it sounds like Alex can add them as we go. I think that'll just help us focus the conversation.
Yeah, and I think the layering of the two starting maps was mostly just to be able to have a visual starting point for the differences between the two to better understand how they converge. But I think like if we can go from Alder to Alder 4 in real time, in near real time, that'd be helpful. So Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins, would you mind talking Alex through the adjustments? I know that you just summarized them, but we weren't live mapping.
Yeah, so Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins, do you want to right now, do you want to just focus on wherever you'd like to start, whether it's down in Brooklyn or anywhere like that? I will bring up Districtor and then we can make the changes, and I'll have it for myself to kind of make sure we're making the right changes, and you can walk me through it.
Okay, so one of the things that we heard from the Brooklyn neighborhood, and this was actually a mistake that was made when we actually drew Alder, is that the north boundary of the split includes a small triangle at the base of Brooklyn, at the west base of Brooklyn, that is part of the Brooklyn neighborhood and is in that rail, in that between McLaughlin and the rail yards. And so Brooklyn asked that we redraw to include that with Brooklyn. And it should have been done in the originally because it was part of the actual neighborhood. So that's a change that is in Alder 4. And there didn't seem to be any reason to not do that because there was it was a mistake from the get-go. So So that is in Alder 4.
So
And-
Commissioner Vince Robbins, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be, we are looking right now at the
Right.
Alder map. And
Right.
the suggested small change would be to make this area right here into the teal district.
Yes,
And that's gonna, yeah, border McLaughlin on the south. So it's just changing
Right.
this small area
Right.
of census blocks. Yeah.
right.
Okay.
And then another thing that I did in Alder 4, and again, it was a tweak for simplification, is if you go down to the southern border, the Ardenwald area is a really weird collection of census blocks. And so I basically tried to square it off, and it doesn't really change any population, but it simplifies how the map looks. Again, it's a bunch of really strange, yeah, so you have to kind of cut it there. And so Alex, right, where, yeah, there and that, yeah.
Yep. Whoops.
Because
Not that.
otherwise they go all the way into Eastmoreland. And that one, right, there's that little guy go, yeah. So anyway, it was basically to try and square that area off some.
There is actually a minor difference
Yep.
in what you had online. You also squared off the edge of Southeast Crystal Springs Boulevard. There's a little to the
Yep,
west.
right here.
There's a,
Yeah.
yep,
This
that
one
was
right here.
squared
Yep.
off as well.
Turned into blue district. Yep.
And also along the line, sorry, getting a little pretty detailed here.
Yeah.
But
No worries.
along the lines of Johnson Creek is also, this is all should be part of that blue district. So basically, everything west of, you had everything west of Southeast 45th as part of a western district, and it just followed right along.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So. I think was it this? Yeah,
Yep.
these are minute changes, but
Yeah,
like-
they're small. They don't have much population at all.
But to make that point about squaring,
Yeah, it makes a square. So
Yeah.
sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no problem. Let me just show the version just so because I like you can see it's a couple different small variations, but what it ends up looking like. You bear with me. I should change my screen. This is how it's more squared off, correct?
right.
So
and
it's
then-
using Harney Drive as the boundary right here.
right.
So this area changed from being blue to teal.
Yes.
And this area, right, south of
Changed
Crystal Springs
to blue.
to blue, correct?
And then up in where northeast crosses into over 84, what we did is along, I think that's yeah, right there, but on 63rd, we went ahead and just made it a straight line. So it took those two, because those census blocks actually cross the neighborhood line.
Yep.
So we squared that all off. And we did that, yeah,
So that the
Yeah.
2 blocks here become orange rather than teal.
right. And what Kari and I did, because we had heard so much about not using Sandy to cut through the neighborhoods, we went ahead and both basically took the neighborhood boundaries and used them on both Maple 3 and Alder 4. So this little area is identical now on both of the maps. Both of those new maps. And then at the very top, there was along the southern edge of the green as the airport goes over into the yellow. There was an area, yeah, actually it's the southern line, not the southern line where the red is, yeah. There were comments from the planning department, a whole bunch of different comments that were submitted by the planning department after they had a meeting with I think Commissioner Hanson and Sophia, and I'm not sure who all was at that meeting, but there was a concern about exactly where that line was and how it impacted a bunch of existing industrial development agreements and things like that that were already in place. And that was one area that we made a slight modification, which also is mimicked on Maple 3. And my request would be that we get some further clarification and then can come back because what they provided and showed was kind of incomprehensible. And I think that this was kind of what they were saying, but I'm not positive. So I think it'd be nice for them to look at it and then get back to us and say, yes, that does address the concerns, or it doesn't for whatever reasons. And then we can look at that a little bit more.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Commissioner, the change that was made was looking at 33rd and moving the census blocks or area that are to the west into this orange district.
Yes.
Okay. So just like I did there.
Well, I think
That's I was gonna say that collects the Sunderland neighborhood altogether, doesn't split it. And I think more importantly, connects the residents of Sunderland, which are down along Columbia Boulevard, with the golf course. Yeah, who cares? And the state prison that is just north of the golf course.
right.
And we would want that neighborhood to have its community and the prison, which is an asset, maybe a negative asset, in the same city council district. And that's, again, reflected in both Alder and Maples.
Commissioner Monjadas.
Can I ask just for clarification then about whether, and this is maybe a process question. So it sounds like for this, we need more clarification about why this change is being made. So I just heard two different things. I heard one was coming from the planners in terms of like agreements. And I think it would be helpful to know, again, the justification, like what agreements and why, so we can have like a more informed conversation about that. And then the other piece I heard was a neighborhood connected to the golf course and the prison as an asset for that. So I just want to pull it apart a little bit and say, I guess my question is more about process, about whether we accept these changes. This is why I kind of wanted it to build one at a time instead of us just saying, here's what we're starting with a whole slate of changes, like, let's go. It sounded to me like the other ones weren't contentious and this one might be a little bit different, but I don't know. So I guess if we're still going to wait for more information, do we want to have a conversation about making this change now, or are we going to, like, what's the process for that, I guess?
Well, I would recommend that I just wanted to say this map now, the new map reflects that change, but I'm not sure whether I drew the line where they were asking for the line to be drawn. And to be clear, it really doesn't impact population. That line on the southern line on where that green meets the yellow district, that is not in a residentially populated part. It's in industrial property, and it still allows Columbia Boulevard to be whole in a single district, which is what we did when we drew it initially. I just don't know exactly where they were asking for that line to be. So that's what we need to get clarity on. And then
and again, it's
decide if we want to accommodate that or not.
Right. I think that's the piece, because there is an issue here of whether it's in an East Side district and East Side residents have more of a say in that, representation have more of a say in that, or if it's in a Northeast district and they have more of a say around the assets in that community. And again, I don't have a position on that. I just think it would be really helpful to have all of that information before we make the change on the clarification of exactly what they're asking for. And then the other piece is what the justifications are for making that change.
Right, and the question about Sunderland neighborhood is where they were originally drawn on all three draft maps splits Sunderland, and it doesn't need to split Sunderland. It doesn't have a huge population impact. And so if we are going to try where possible to honor neighborhood boundaries, then Sunderland was an example of where we could fix that, and it doesn't have a population impact that we for deviation that we have to worry about.
Just quickly
So,
switched
I
my
think-
screen to say that I just want to show Sunderland here. So it's this boundary here, and you can see how an older map, as a draft map, it was split. And the idea would be to change that to make it whole.
And just to clarify, so changing it, I think I'm seeing the Sunderland boundary. So for changing it, it would be moving that border to the Northeast 33rd. Okay.
That is I don't want to create more questions, but the Sunderland Neighborhood Association actually does extend into this natural area here, but 33rd, would make it.
There's no streets. There's
Okay,
no
yeah,
streets
exactly.
here, so
Yeah.
you have to use a street.
Yep.
So find the boundary. So Commissioner Monjadas, I think there's a point of clarification that I noted that I think the staff can kind of follow up with the planning department just to kind of clarify the rationale behind the request with more clarity, and also that border, I think, just like what they're specifically talking about. And then I don't know if we'll be able to get it back for tomorrow's meeting, but we can try to, I think, get a response back as soon as possible. I'm looking at Sophia. Sorry, I think I saw nods. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'll go.
Thanks, Sophia. Commissioner Judd?
Yeah, just to piggyback on the request, it would be great if we just had an Excel spreadsheet that said, here's the change, here's the factors considered or the reasons that drove the change as the next column, and then the last column to talk about which value or theme that we are attempting to uplift with that change. That'd be helpful so that when we begin to explain this to ourselves and then also to the community, that we at least, and also as we begin to weigh these changes against one another, it'd be helpful to have that as a record.
I think the staff can kind of circle up on how best to, so that we're not representing your views, right? But like kind of capturing all the changes. Okay. All right. I think we can also do the same, if it sounds right, for the Maple map too, because there are certain, but maybe we start with the areas in common and then just look at some of the proposed changes from Maple, if that works. Okay. Commissioner Chisholm, I saw you nodding.
Yes, that works great.
So I think theoretically we can potentially use, because we already have finished version of Alder 4 online. We can probably just live edit the map we have right now to reflect the distinctions that you had with Maple 3. Anything that's different from the alterations that were made to Alder 4.
Or just to start here in the flows mapping tool before we go over to Districtor, I'm having to see a little tour of the difference between Maple and Maple 3. Want to overlay them? Oh yeah, these are overlaid. Great.
So yep. So now we are starting with red boundaries are draft map Maple, as the public commented on them, and the color boundaries are Maple version 3.
Great. Well, the first thing I'll say is the Sunderland neighborhood change is exactly the same. That is harmonized with what Sharon did on Alder. And whatever we decide about that, we can decide about both of them. And then if you'll go over to the intersection of 84 and 205, there's another very minor thing. Further southeast where the curves, where 84 and 205 line up, that little wedge between 84 and 205 there. In the original Alder map, the boundary was 84, the Banfield Expressway, and in the Maple map, it is 205, the Veterans Highway. That's a segment that is, I don't believe, has any population in it. And just to harmonize with Alder, I moved the boundary from 84 to 205 to 84. Just make it nice and clean so that we're not arguing about that. We're talking about bigger things. Third, now we're getting to some substantive stuff. So the original Alder map was all about neighborhood associations. The original Cedar map was all about transit boundaries. And the Alder map, the Maple map, this one, in this part of Northeast Portland, we kind of, did some of each. The Rose City Park neighborhood was along the neighborhood boundary, and in Roseway, we used Sandy Boulevard to split. Sort of, one of each. And so what I've done here is to adjust. We heard a huge amount of feedback from folks in Roseway, and in general, please respect our neighborhood boundaries. And so one change here has been to move from Sandy Boulevard and Roseway to take the entire Roseway zone, and then just as Sharon did with Alder, make the left edge of it 63rd, even though that means that there's a handful of census blocks which are split between neighborhoods that are still split. Does that make sense to everyone? And then, of course, now we just added a bunch of people into the teal, the Southeast district. We need to balance that off somewhere else. And that actually, solving that problem actually helps us solve another problem, which is, we heard again from people, we want neighborhood boundaries to be respected. And we heard specifically from the folks in Hosford-Abernathy that they were upset that we had split Hosford-Abernathy in the Maple map in two along Loud's Addition, along 12th. So having added a bunch of folks over in Roseway, that allows us to then extend Maple, the West District in Maple, to include Loud's Addition and the entirety of the Hosford-Abernathy neighborhood. That also has the benefit of doing another thing that Hosford-Abernathy people said, which was, one, make us whole, but two, pair us with Buckman. Whatever you do with us, please just pair us with Buckman. We work together and so on and so forth. So now what we have in this West District on Maple is the entire West Side plus 3 whole neighborhoods, Kearns, Buckman, and Hosford-Abernathy. For me, it's a process of really trying to respect what the public told us. Broadly, respect neighborhood boundaries, specifically make Hosford whole and Roseway whole, and specifically make Hosford paired with Buckman. Personally, I would prefer it to be split and have Loud's Addition separate, but I want to respect the public engagement. They were pretty clear about that. There was no opposition to that idea. So 2 minor technical changes, and then this shift to protect neighborhoods in Roseway and Hosford. That's what you got in Maple 3.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Manhattan says and also you made a note in the request in the comments about the deviation, expanding the Southeast District north. And I think looking at the trade-offs, expanding the West District, the West into the Buckman further south. I don't know if that's what you wanted to follow up on too.
Yeah, the first question was to understand what the deviation is when we add Roseway into Southeast, just to understand if it's necessary to even go into the other portions of Southeast. And the other piece is, I feel like it's helpful. I think this could go in that spreadsheet that we're talking about, because I would imagine that particular Southeast neighborhood, yes, they wanted to be whole, but I don't think they would want it to be moved to the West Side. So I think that it's coming into tension with what folks are saying. And I know that our larger question is about how much of the East Side is going to be moved, particularly the Southeast side is going to be moved into the West Side. So I'm uncomfortable actually expanding that in the Southeast Central area. So it's something that I think we need to have broader conversation about. So if we're going to add Roseway or keep Roseway whole, for example, and the deviation isn't very strong, then I can support that. But if it's going to lead to if it's tethered to other decisions that I think are more controversial, then I'm going to oppose that change for now.
Yeah, I think what we heard from the Hosford folks was they definitely were in the give us Alder please camp. But they also said, but whatever you do, make us whole in Paris with Buckman. If you're going to do Maple, make us whole in Paris with Buckman. I think the question about the Sellwood versus Central City there is a totally reasonable one. It's the one we're going to argue about a lot. I think it's the big question the commission faces. I do want to make sure that what we have, at least as the alternative, is as close as we can get to what the public engagement process led us to, what they asked us for. I think you're right. The Hosford folks said, give us Alder. But they said also, if you're going to do this other thing, please make it a little bit better. So I want to make sure that we're at least respecting that comment.
Commissioner Manhattan.
Yeah, I just have clarification on Alex's point. So it's changing from 4 point. Can we clarify his comment in there and what the deviation is between districts?
Yeah, if you have the Maple map as it was, let me bring my note again, just so I say the right number. Maple map as it went out as a draft map was 4.6 overall deviation. If you make all the changes that Commissioner Chisholm just went through to get Maple version 3, it decreases the overall deviation to 3.8%.
And
what if you just
Maple-
make the Roseway?
Right, I can do
change?
that live right now if you'd like, just so we can see it in real time. Commissioner Chisholm, you might have that, but I'll just recreate it it's for everyone to see. So right now we are looking at the Maple draft map, and the first major change that would have any impact on population would be making Roseway whole, so to speak, in part of the teal district. So that would be changing this area. I'll have to clean that edge up just a little bit. So we're going to use 63rd for all of that here. So this would become orange. Just like that. Correct, Commissioner Chisholm? So then deviations. Bear with me, because remember that this number is telling us the maximum deviation of just the single district of the teal one that is now over is 4.6%. But we got to capture the lowest one, 159. So 6.7% overall deviation.
That's what I get to.
And the minimum that we've been working with as a basis is 5%. Correct.
It's a good goal.
I'm
yeah.
curious. I'm curious about what the deviation looks like if you put that in the Northeast district, or maybe trade off Hollywood.
And sorry, so and just for clarification, the request is for the entire neighborhood to be included?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the deviation between moving, because I understand the goal of keeping Roseway together, and I think that's really important. So it's trying to figure out the deviation and maybe play with, if it's in the Northeast district, if it's in that district, it sounds like it's at 6.7. That's what I heard. Yeah.
Do you prefer, so like making basically all of Roseway into the orange Northeast district? Just see what that would do. Changes. That would be 4.2%.
Agreed.
So, are there general thoughts on that approach to, so first I should say, like, this is working from the Maple map, specifically, not the Alder map. The Maple map also had the original Maple map also had the largest deviation to start, right?
Out of the 3 draft maps.
Of the 3 draft maps, yes. Okay, yeah, and seeing heads nod. Okay, Commissioner Vincent Robbins.
I guess I appreciate trying to look at these individual, but the thing is that whatever you do with Roseway, Hosford Abernathy wanted to be whole. So as soon as you make Hosford Abernathy whole, then it forces you back up north of 84 to make some other shift. You can't do them both in you can't do them both separately. They affect each other in terms of the deviation.
The trade-offs between either splitting.
Yeah,
If you're currently
You split
splitting one
one
of
or
the
you split
neighborhoods,
the
once you
other,
make one
right,
whole,
right,
yeah,
right,
the trade-off. I see. And sorry, I think the correction was of the 3 draft maps, Maple had the highest overall deviation of 4.6. Yeah, 4.6%. Okay. What are thoughts
Can I
on?
If the goal is to perfect Maple and Alder, to sort of put our best foot forward on each of them, and as much as we can react to what is, I think, seen as relatively non-controversial public input. I think you want to put Hofstra and Abernathy together. Again, I like not having it together. I have my thoughts about that, but I don't care about neighborhoods as much. But the public has made it pretty clear they do, and so I think I want to be responsive to that request and offer up a map where Hofstra is put together, whole and connected to Buckman. And if it ends up being it ends up being that that's why we end up with Alder, so be it. But we'll at least respect what the public told us.
And Commissioner Manhattan, I think you were trying to jump in as well.
Yeah, and I think it's just highlighting a point in terms of where we're making these tweaks, right? So I think the big question or the big point of tension is whether we're pulling from inner southeast or from southwest to be connected to the west side district. So we could discuss this change and like this tension point right here. It sounds like, and again, I want to untether it from Roseway because I understand that, there's the piece around keeping Roseway whole, but those aren't necessarily connected. I do understand right now, even, in this example, there is a way to do it where we keep Roseway whole and move it up. It sounds to me like the next question is what to do about Hosford Abernathy. And I think that's going to continue to be a point of tension. To your point, it sort of like starts to move us into, are we looking at Maple or are we looking at Alder? It's a different question than Roseway in my mind. Because Roseway is in Alder map, it's whole, correct? Right.
Yes.
So we could talk about that as a tweaks that Commissioner Chisholm wants to make to the Maple map, but I think again, that's where we're getting into, this is where I don't want to get into the back and forth of picking a map. I would rather get into a space where we're building a map where we do have consensus of the changes that are being made. And this feels to me outside the boundary of consensus changes.
I think there was also a point earlier about kind of leaving the core question around where to cross the river for a discussion with the full commission and making that decision as a whole body. Whereas like this group, for instance, may decide that getting each, a like version 2, let's call it version 2 of each maple and alder that takes into account like kind of those kind of core areas of similarities, and then using those as the base map, and then going into tomorrow's meeting, we can actually focus on maybe that bigger question of where to cross the river or to what extent to cross the river, right? If it's how far east do you go? And that could be where this group lands, just kind of seeing where the consensus is, at least for now tonight. I just want to throw that one out. Commissioner Lorente and then Commissioner Judd, co-chairs, Lorente and Judd.
Yeah. Thank you, Autumn. And I agree with that approach. I think this question around Hosford is something we should definitely take to the full commission for consideration. I do actually, I am quite liking this idea of making that edit to keep Hosford Abernathy whole. I think it, on one hand, it creates a larger east side contingency to potentially connect with the west side. And I think that ties back to both comments to respect neighborhood association boundaries, keep Hosford whole, but also some of the general themes around like sentiments of disenfranchisement and the sort of contingency that we on the east side that we are connecting to the west side, and making sure that they are, you know, that they will have an equal and equitable shot at representation on this new map. So I like that edit. And I think it also gives us a better contrast when we look at the fundamental differences between Alder and Maple. I think keeping those three together, Buckman, Kearns, and Hosford, creates a better contrast with the Selwood block that for us to sort of sink our teeth into and wrestle with in terms of which contingency has the strongest rationale for connecting across the river. So I think that's, you know, just wanted to offer that. I also wanted to uplift, since we spent a little bit of time dealing with the neighborhoods along Sandy, there were some map suggestions about keeping Hollywood, Rose City Park, and Roseway districted together for the purposes of maintaining that coalition. I did a little bit of tinkering. I don't know with some of these other revisions whether we're going to be able to do that while staying within the population deviation, but I just wanted to uplift that, you know, as we're discussing this, if there's a way to keep those three neighborhood associations districted together, I think that's something we can maybe try to accommodate. And yeah, I think that's all I'll say on that. I know we had some additional input around Jade and Division and Montevilla, but we can cross that bridge when we get to it in our discussion, but I'll leave that there.
Thank you, Commissioner Lorente. Commissioner Judd.
Yeah, I just have a point of clarification and also a question around process. So point of clarification, the question around where the maps across the river, it's not the goal for us to solve that question this evening. I don't think this group was empowered to do solving, but we do have to provide, I do think maybe this is where we need to agree that we need to struggle with this question in order to provide context for tomorrow's discussion. And so one of the, so we think about this a little bit like, and we've already kind of been doing this, right? We think about this like solving a puzzle. Do we look for individual pieces and slot them first? Or do we start with the bigger frame and then work in and focus in on those pieces, those edging pieces that will finish it? And so are we working towards a collective understanding about those prioritized big boulders that need to be moved, so that when if we solve those, then those other sort of smaller pieces, we have context in which why we're moving them. So I just want to make sure that that's a question, not a declaration, but are we working towards that, or are we sort of throwing things in the dark here?
Commissioner Manjarres.
Oh, Autumn, I don't know if you want to respond to that first, and then I can.
Yeah, I mean, I will not make the decision for you or even the assessment. I'd say we do have a meeting that we can go into with the full commission. I think in terms of the charge, the basic agreement on last Wednesday's meeting was coming up with maps that kind of either a map or maps that were ready for deliberation and discussion. I think if you've gotten to a point where you have versions of kind of two base maps that have largely reconciled the smaller points, right? Either errors, right? or just new like knowledge and requests that generally you have consensus across the whole group, I think that's a pretty strong starting point. If you zero in on, from what I've heard, Alder and Maple, they're the core questions, and I think these are the boulders you were kind of getting to, Commissioner Judd, around. And I think multiple commissioners, Commissioner Wise raised this earlier, right? What are these renter populations, right? What does it mean to be included in the West? What does it mean to be consolidated or distributed potentially, right? And then what are communities of interest? That could be something that you wrestle with greater clarity. If you've kind of settled on some of the smaller tweaks, you've gotten a basis where, you know, both maps have an acceptable distributions of population generally, but really it's a question of not just who crosses, like where do you cross the river, but it's why, right?
Yeah, and again, I agree with you. If I can just follow up on that, I think, as we said earlier, understanding the why, and I'm just, this is again just a process question. We spent a lot of time this evening reconciling the changes in the maps, and we have not yet gotten to the why for some of those bigger decisions. And we are pressed with a sense of urgency. So that's my only concern, is how are we really cognizant of the fact that, again, we are up against some time, and there's some big boulders that we need to work with. And it's just a observation and a question. That's all.
I mean, I will also ask this to the broader group, right? Where do you think, like, where is your thinking now, right? Do you as a group, now you are just over half of the commission, right? Do you have a strong sense that there is a kind of a cohesive rationale for one approach versus the other, or some kind of a hybrid approach, right? And if you're not feeling that you've kind of gotten that sense, not just as an like just as a small group, but also having a feel for the rest of the commission and where you'd like to go, right? If you have a strong enough sense for where you'd like to start that discussion, and you believe that you have a single map to start it, I think that we can go into tomorrow's meeting pretty successfully and really have that conversation. If you're still feeling like you've reconciled some of the kind of smaller points, and we can follow up on some of the more detailed lines, things like that, but like you've really zoned in on kind of like these two, like one or two kind of core questions, but there are kind of still two core ways to approach it, and you want the fuller commission to wrestle with it, I think we use tomorrow's meeting to really drill down into those and to see if we can have a single approach going forward. Always recognizing what most people on the commission have said, there's no perfect map. But there may be a map that, once we've wrestled with it, like gives you enough confidence over an approach and takes into consideration all those like kind of core principles and questions that you've been wrestling with over these past months. So I'm going to pause there. I've spoken a lot there as your facilitator. But that's just a view from here. I'm going to ask for Commissioners Van Sickle Robbins, the Manjares, and then Chisholm.
I just wanted to throw out one other piece of information. So when I looked at, okay, is there an alternative along the eastern border of the Willamette River where you could try and blend the cedar approach with the maple approach with the alder approach, and basically run the whole board of the neighborhoods that hug the Willamette River, but keep those neighborhoods whole? And it's just not possible to do without then having to split the west side. And that, for me, is a non-starter, is a non-starter, because I think that creates a totally different map that we have not had any opportunity to get public feedback on. It forces St. John's across the river. We already heard from them that they don't think that's right. So anyway, it creates another hornet's nest on all kinds of other fronts. So that was just I did try and look at whether you could do that, but it forces a lot of other things.
Because of the added population. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Manjares, and then Chisholm.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And Commissioner Judd, I really appreciate your grappling with the process piece here, because I do think that my recommendation would be that we package some of these decisions and do move one at a time. It seems to me like the first part of this was making those tweaks for errors. And then we started to like bleed into substantive comments and differences. Sorry, my dog is trying to eat my dinner. I think it would be really helpful to package. And I will say, and again, this is like process concerns that I'm going to elevate, is that I think there are some folks who have a lot of like time, I will just say, to do this work separate from the work group. But when I showed up to the work group today, I had assumed that we would be putting some of these changes on the table to grapple with and discuss. So one, for example, was sort of the Roseway, Rose City, Hollywood, trying to keep those together and figuring out what some options were. So I would like to offer that as part of the package of considerations, understanding that if we do that and we put them in the Northeast or the Southeast or figure that out, it does have implications on other pieces. I think it's worth considering. Again, it doesn't mean that we're going to make the changes. What I don't want to get into the place of, though, is that, and I think this is what we were clear about with the public, is that we're not just choosing one of the three maps, right? So there are other considerations, and we're not dancing around the difficult questions and the feedback that folks offered. So when folks said, I want my neighborhood to be whole and I want to be part of Southeast, we can't pick and choose the pieces of that we want to hear and say, well, but they did want to say that. I feel like that's a little disingenuous, and I'm just going to say it out loud. But I do think that if we could package some of the bigger decisions, so for example, the question around keeping the three neighborhoods that I just mentioned, because they do collaborate, I understand, and I saw Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins comment about where they go to school. Again, they collaborate on many things together. So that is one important factor, and it's one of many factors. So we have to consider what folks have said. I just want to look at those different options, and I don't want to be in a situation where we're sort of doing our own work and then it comes back and it's like, if you sort of created separate maps and come forward, then that's what we work on. I was hoping that we would get to a situation where we could have sort of that baseline that we're working from, and that we could work on some of these conversations together, and where we don't find agreement, we could actually just package those. And I loved the suggestion about putting it into some Excel spreadsheet so that we can sort of like have some grounding in the justifications for it, so everybody can look at it, including other folks who are not part of this conversation. So it doesn't feel like if you've spent the most time on it, you get the most influence. You know what I mean? It's just like we're in this work group process, and I thought this was going to be that, and it hasn't felt like it's that. So I'm just going to say it out loud. But packaging those big questions, figuring out how we can grapple with those questions, and then going one at a time to move into other questions is going to be really helpful. Also, we are still in a process, and this is the other process piece that I want to put up. We did go through the community feedback, but if there is more feedback that we can get over the next month, we still have a public comment process. Is that correct? So we could ask those. I don't want to speak on behalf of anybody. I think we need to stop speaking on behalf of folks. I think if we have points of tension and folks are saying, I want X, I want Y, I think it's worth asking for more feedback. And then we get to a point where folks just have to make a decision, right? And we need 9 commissioners to approve a map. Because I will say where I'm at, and I hear Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins speaking to, if we go into the west side, then I'm not going to be supportive. I feel very similar about the inner southeast side, to say if we go further on their inner southeast side, which I heard loud and clear in every single meeting that I attended, folks do not want to be pulled into the west side. So I'm not going to go down that track without really strong justification when it comes into tension about why we're doing that. So I think that if we could package those big questions as we go and at least figure out what questions are being put on the table, I think that would be really helpful.
I did want to speak to the process, some of the process questions. Yes, so the public comment period, kind of like the coordinated public comment period, where all the kind of like from a volume perspective, all of that information will be processed, included in the report, that's passed. But there are still, the public can still comment on like specific work as it's ongoing. I think the key challenge, though, is that you may get a lower volume of comments just kind of in this kind of interim period that's a lot shorter and less concentrated and focused. That doesn't mean you can't get it. It's just like it may be less and maybe not as specific to the specific question, just as a flag. I think one of the, from, taking kind of today's session, where I think, every commissioner has a slightly different style for how to process the information that they hear. Some are more auditory, some need maps, some really process data and want to like try it and work with it and process it ahead of time. And maybe want to, especially if you've spent a lot of time on a specific version of a map and you're kind of like, I made a mistake here and I'd like to put that on the table. That is why I kind of wanted to, set at the top, just say, like, what are folks comfortable with? Are you comfortable seeing kind of these initial iterations of the maps that then kind of take all that, like some of the shared feedback that we heard over the last several weeks and just incorporates it? And if that feels right. And then also spend some time overlaying the maps. I think we tried to have an approach to live mapping that can meet multiple commissioners' approach to kind of seeing things in real time, as well as reconciling some of the like private work that individuals have done. And so this is like kind of a process check. I definitely hear you, but wanted to create some space for all those different types of processing information. And also, leaving the table open, like we still have time for some live mapping if we do want to, in real time see more of the kind of options for packaging, as for instance, a Roseway or a Rose City Park into one district or another, and then seeing what that impact is like. It is a little more limited in the sense that it also does take a little bit more time. So we might not get all of those scenarios run in real time. But we can also follow up if there are other scenarios that you'd like to run, and then we can provide that while going into the meeting tomorrow too. But I do hear you, and I think like we'll be pretty intentional about kind of also like we're going to get into a big group tomorrow, right? And we'll maybe be able to do less live mapping, but we should be able to kind of have an approach generally to help get the full group up to speed, and then have a basis for a kind of like a thoughtful kind of substantive discussion. Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, thank you, Autumn, for that. That was very helpful framing. It's no surprise. I'm a big advocate for the Maple map. Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins is a big advocate for the Alder map. And that's why I think I was really heartened that she reached out to me and asked me to work with her yesterday and say, okay, let's find the places where one or the other of us has maybe made a small error, or there are what we think of as relatively non-controversial adjustments that the public told us about, and can we harmonize our two maps, which we're going to fight over later, but harmonize them in the places where we're not going to fight over them, so that what we can present to the full commission are two maps that really just highlight the big question, right? Are we going to have apple pie or are we going to have cherry pie, right? Like, we don't talk about all the other stuff at the table, just those two. That's the big question. Alder map and Maple map are about the big question is the central city piece or the Selwood piece. So my goal working with her on that was to take a bunch of little tiny stuff off the table, and I think my hope is also that each of us working with the folks that we've been working with. I know Sharon talked to the folks she was working with on the Alder map. I talked to the folks I was working with on the Maple map to sort of sort through those questions. And I think one of the loudest things we heard was keep neighborhoods together. I don't like that feedback very much. I could care less about neighborhoods. I'm not a neighborhood guy, but that was loud and clear from the public feedback we got, which is why I'm trying to fix the Roseway question and the Hosford question. And I think if we're going to put our best foot forward on the Maple map, like the Maple map's the Maple map, that's what we're going to end up passing in the end. I don't know that it is, but if it is, I want it to reflect the public feedback, which was keep neighborhoods together. And then, if it ends up being all that's great. I'm fine with that. So I just I'm a little frustrated here that what I'm hearing is a little bit of like, no, don't make it as good as you can make it. Don't put your best foot forward. And what I want to do is put my best foot forward and make the Maple map as good as it can possibly be. And I think we've got strong consensus from folks who are here and folks who are not here that the Roseway and Hosford pieces are pieces that make sense on the Maple map. So I would love, I don't know if this is a motion or a proposal or a suggestion, but I would love to get to a place where at the end of tonight, what we've got is the best possible Maple map and the best possible Alder map going forward to the full commission tomorrow. That we can then really wrestle with this tough question. What did the public tell us? What makes the most sense? The public is not a vote, but they give us a lot of good feedback, and we, as 13 people appointed by the mayor, approved by the city council, from a very diverse group of neighborhoods and backgrounds and interests and political values, can wrestle with. Because this was a vote, Maple wins. Starwood came out in droves against the Alder map. That's not the only value here, right? So like, we got to wrestle with that. And what I would do is make sure that we're wrestling with that and not talking about the prison in Sunderland or whatever, you know?
So just would like to say, like, I'm pretty sure all of the commissioners are trying to put their best foot forward, right? Especially as a full commission. And I think as individuals too, right? I think that's part of that ethos around, there's no perfect, but we all are trying to do the best. I mean, I know, like, I see y'all nodding. I know you're trying to do it. I just wanted to like raise that up. So Commissioner Manhattan, I do see your hand, but I also wanted to invite Commissioners Baldini, Wise, Lorente. We haven't heard from you in a while, and Commissioner Kimura as well. If you have thoughts on how to move forward, we'd love to hear them. And Commissioner Manhattan, I did see your hand too. I just wanted to know. You're good? Commissioner Kimura?
Can we do the same exercise with taking that we did? I mean, I know that we might not have time to do where with the flow analytics folks took the central east side and moved it over to the west side, and we saw the differences, taking out Buckman, Kearns, and Hartford Abernathy, and then do that same exercise with the Eastmoreland Selwood map. I'm not sure what it would do, but visually, I think I would like to see that, just to make sure that, and then have the little thing on the side that says now it now has X number of people versus the other way where it had not as much people, kind of thing. Because I think that's ultimately going to go forward for the full commission to look at, as well as the tweaks that have happened. Just so that right now we're just kind of talking about it, and I think that having to look at it with the red outlines and the coloring might help me better understand what I am not, or what I am aiming for.
And sorry, Commissioner, could you just repeat the proposed, kind of like what you'd like to see, moving Selwood and Eastmoreland? So I'm guessing using the Alder. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Map, and then doing the same thing with the Maple map, but using the central east side, taking out Hartford Abernathy, and because I don't know that it makes sense unless I actually see it.
Alex, I think I see you working, but
Yeah, would it be maybe to start, if I'm understanding correctly, would it just be helpful to see the two side by side with the stats? Yeah, let me do that.
And while Alex is pulling that up, are there any other, so we have about 12 minutes in this meeting. Did want to reserve a few minutes at the end to just like make sure we're aligned on an approach for tomorrow's meeting. Commissioner Wise, I saw you come off mute. Would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say a couple things, like I think points where there are consensus, like I think that makes sense to present back to the full commission. Or I guess I resonate with some of the things that Commissioner Judd brought up, which is, I really want to tie the explanation or the why as to like why each part of, or why each map would be crossing over the river, and really like tracking the value, like a value to that, and seeing if that relates back to earlier conversations that we've had as well. So I mean, I guess that's my hope for the conversation tomorrow, is to be super clear about like what set of values are we bringing, or what set of values are attached to each map. I mean, knowing that some of that is may mean different things to us as individuals, but I think it would still be helpful just to like show the public like how we're starting to like make those decisions and come up with that. So um
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. And you'd like to, just to be clear, like, you want to be like articulating that as we go and as we're like considering the various maps, and also be able to have that rationale communicated effectively kind of for the public as well, once you've made a decision. Gotcha. So Alex, I'll let you.
Yeah,
take it
I'm
from
just
here.
gonna show both of them, and I decided it might be helpful to just kind of walk through a couple of things and like sketch as I go here. So I'm just screenshotting Alder number 4 on the left. So this is the slight modification, and I'll just go through them real quick. And I know I'm not zoomed in or anything, but I think, we talked about up here in the north, moving that small area here into the orange district with the rest of the population in that neighborhood right there. There was a really small tweak that we can't see on 63rd. There was a tweak down here to include all of Brooklyn in the teal neighborhood. And then if we look over on the right side of the screen, we have Maple number 3, and you can see how they mimicked each other. That was the goal of kind of getting some around the edges worked out. So we got that same change here. So a very small change by 205 and 84 that doesn't affect population, has that area between the highways and the teal district. There was the change to Maple that aligns it with the Alder number 4 map. So that's including all of Roseway in the teal district. To offset that change in population, the Maple map made a change right there to get all of Hosford Abernathy in the blue district. So I'm gonna leave it just there, and I'm gonna look up a couple stats too, because I know people are interested in the overall deviation. So Alder on this side, this is, remember, we don't care about just the maximum. We want to have the overall deviation. So that's 3.2%. And then Maple 3 is 3.8%. You can see how they align, but then the main things were, differences here that we're looking at would be where the blue West Side District crosses. Is it going to be the 3 neighborhoods in Central East Side, Kearns, Buckman, Hosford Abernathy, or is it going to be south in Selwood and Westmoreland? Is that helpful? Are there any questions with that?
Commissioner Manhattan.
Yeah, I just want to make a request for the conversation tomorrow, because I feel like there's a little bit of talking past each other. I had a completely different understanding from our last conversation. I thought we were going to come in and build sort of a consensus map that we can work from. But it sounds like some folks are not in agreement with that and feel like we should just pick between one of the two. So I feel like going into the conversation tomorrow, it would be helpful for me if I just want to know, are we in a situation where we're picking between one of the two, or are we building a consensus map? And I do think that we should come to some agreement about that before we go into tomorrow. We're going to have the same conversation over again. I'm just trying to get to a point where we can just decide like what is best for the group to get to a place where we can actually like have a conversation about that. So I just want to put that on the table as my request heading into tomorrow. And I don't know if we make it at the beginning of tomorrow or at the end of today with this group, but I can see like that's sort of the difference here is like some folks are working under the assumption that we're just picking one of the two maps and we're making each map sort of a competitor for that game. And then the other folks, myself included, thought we were building something in this workspace, but that has not played out in that way. So I just want to be clear about what tomorrow is.
I did want to synthesize the discussion from last Wednesday, kind of where the full group landed was there was generally, this was more like a straw poll, was not a formal vote. But most folks said had a sense to start with Alder and then make revisions and edits from there. A number of folks said I like both. I have a preference for Alder, but I would like to see Maple, and some even said I'd like the best of Alder and Maple if we can manage it. And then there were a couple folks who said I'd like to start with Maple as well. And so coming into this meeting, if we were able to kind of find that map that blended the two with like, quote, the best of Alder and the best of Maple, I think that wasn't a potential outcome we wanted to leave on the table in case you could get there. But also, as we started the discussion, I think kind of got the sense that there were still kind of these core questions and there was some discomfort around having this group kind of like decide on a single map. And so where we left it on Wednesday was that this group would prepare one or more maps to take to the fuller group for consideration. And so it wasn't decided in the full session. And we kind of did get the sense that we probably weren't going to converge on that one kind of map that definitively reconciled all of Maple and Alder, though it could reconcile some of the smaller differences between the two. So that's how I was kind of tracking the discussion there. I think I see some head nods, but anyone can correct me if that was like if you read the situation differently as well. Commissioner Valdini and Commissioner Chisholm, or then Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, Autumn, I think that was spot on. I think that's exactly the impression that I got too. And while I agree that a consensus map in theory would be great, I just don't see a way that we could build a consensus map. I see ways that we could make the maps on the table more similar, and I think that's what Commissioner Chisholm and Van Sickle-Robbins were doing. They were just trying to kind of highlight where the area of disagreement is, although I understand your discomfort with it. So, you know, I see all of your points and I agree. Building a consensus map would have felt the best, but because of our differences on this map, I cannot imagine what that consensus map would look like. It just doesn't seem possible. So yeah, so I feel like it's better. I'm a little uncomfortable with the language of saying you know, full commission, you must pick one of these two maps, but I think we're kind of getting to that point where it really is going to be one of the two. Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Chisholm, and then I have a couple of questions for the group before we adjourn.
Yeah, I'll agree with everything that Commissioner Valdini just said. And to put a sharper point on it, the choices, if we were trying to come up with a consensus map, right? One choice would be the west side doesn't cross the river anywhere. Well, we know that's not a starter. Like, they can't do that. You know, we have people in Buckman and Kern saying, don't put me on the west side. People would say, don't put me on the west side. The obvious thing that they would all love is nobody's on the west side, but we can't legally do that. The other alternative is we put a lot of stuff on the west side. And as Commissioner Van Sickle-Robbins just walked us through, if we do every single neighborhood along the east side of the Willamette into the west side, you have tremendous numbers of implications all over the place. I tried to do that today. You can see them on districtors. They're labeled CTFR. That's short for cross to F and river. 1 and 2. It's very difficult to do that. Or the other version is a version that breaks all the neighborhoods along the west side, which is essentially what Cedar did, which of course is the map that got the most negative feedback from the public. It was not a everybody loves it compromise. It was an everybody hates it compromise. And I really commend Commissioner Lorente for taking a swing at it. I think it's actually great. It could be an incredible compromise if everybody didn't hate it so much. But I do think, as Commissioner Baldini said, we're coming down to the place where we're going to perfect these two maps, and then we have to make a philosophical, hard choice. And I don't know where it's going to land. I love Maple. Commissioner Van Robbins loves Alder. Sounds like maybe in the early straw poll, more people loved Alder than Maple. I don't know. We asked for more data. We now got that more data from Alex today about the percentage of renters in each of those districts. So I don't know where the chips are going to land. All I know is I don't want to fail and turn this over to the city council. It's got to be Maple or Alder. I prefer Maple. Others prefer Alder. That's great. But let's not fail.
Commissioner Judd?
Yeah, perhaps the focus is not on a map, but I'm sorry. It sounds like again that we're creating this dichotomy between two maps. What we've seen, even in this discussion, and I agree with Commissioner Monjadas in terms of it was unexpected that we would have the map work, a lot of the map work done beforehand, so it caught us a bit off guard. But what we've seen, even in this discussion and the work that was done, was a convergence. And so we are moving towards a convergence, and they're becoming more and more similar. The challenge that we have is not a choice between one map or the other, but those big questions that we've already talked about, which we've already highlighted. We've listed them last time, and I'm not really sure. I mean, I think we've cleared all the other debris out of the way. We still have those big questions to solve. And so tomorrow, as we go into this discussion, a couple things unfortunately seem like they have to happen. One is we've got to sort of, in some ways, summarize, redo this conversation again, and hope that folks can move quickly along with it. Otherwise, we still will miss an opportunity to tackle that big question. And again, so it caught us a bit off guard, but appreciate the work. But they are coming together, and they're becoming more and more similar, except for those very large areas where we've got to come together and think through and justify why we're making this decision. And I don't think those questions change much. I'll stop there. I don't think those questions change much, and I'm not sure if we progressed towards answering them at this point.
Thank you, Coach Judd. I think, by the way, I'd highlight that I'm not sure that everyone in the room is uncomfortable answering the questions. I think there was, if I was sensing it right, the discomfort was having this group move too far along in trying to answer those questions for the broader group. But I do see you shaking your head, but I also see folks nodding.
No, sorry, that wasn't the point, but I understand why you went there, but that wasn't the point. Appreciate it though.
Okay, sorry, I think I misinterpreted it. But I would say, like, I think for tomorrow's, I know we're a couple minutes over, so I just wanted to get aligned in how we approach tomorrow's meeting, right? We can have that fuller discussion. If this group is prepared to move along, I guess for now we'll call them Alder 4 and Maple 3 just for clarity, right? Those two kind of reconciled maps, just for consideration and deliberation among the full group. I'm seeing head nods. Is there any opposition to that approach for tomorrow at this point? And it's not a be all and all. It's not the battle royale. It's more of a way to kind of ground that bigger discussion around those kind of core questions. I'd like to know if there's anyone or any individuals who would like to either present specifically on kind of the output from today's session and maybe articulate what you're wrestling with and what you'd like the group to focus on tomorrow.
I nominate Commissioner Lorente.
Commissioner Lorente. I mean, we don't do formal nominations often enough in this group.
I'll do the report out. I was actually going to nominate myself, so we're on the same page. Yeah.
Like I said, we don't do it enough, and self-nominations haven't seen enough of them. I'll tell you what. All right. Nothing is baked, but I think you kind of have a basis to start with. We'll have some discussion questions. I dropped the discussion question in the chat. Those are the ones that we started with. I just wanted to make sure that we circled back. Those might not be the ones that you want to focus on tomorrow, but I think like the kind of core one, at least is that first one, kind of like where are we crossing the river? That seems to be where you're all coalescing. If there are other specific kind of core questions, I think it'd be helpful to just name them at the top of the meeting tomorrow before we move into discussion. And then tomorrow's meeting is pretty much really just focused on really like refining the maps and having these like bigger picture discussions. So that will be the bulk of how we spend tomorrow evening. Commissioner Chisholm.
Yeah, not for discussion now, but a flag for everyone here. One of the questions that Commissioner Van Roberts and I were trying to harmonize on was the boundary of where both maps are at Montevilla around Division versus Mill Street. It's one of the few places where on both Alder 4 and Maple 3, there is still a neighborhood that is not whole, the Montevilla neighborhood. And the Montevilla neighborhood asked us to make them whole, but that bringing it down to Division Street from Mill intersects with the Jade District. And we had early on in this process, months ago, wanted to keep the Jade District whole. And then the feedback from Apano and the Jade Business Community was they wanted the boundary along 82nd, splitting up a small piece of the Jade into the central southeast district. I reached out and I copied a few of you, not all of you, being mindful of the fact that we can't have a quorum in an email. A few of you with a conversation with Duncan Hong from Apano, asking that question: are you okay with moving from Mill to Division Street? And the answer came back just before this meeting started. They don't have any major concerns with that. So I suspect that one of the things we want to do with either Maple or Alder, or depending on our order of operations, is make that adjustment as well. Again, it's not really a population question. It's about making Montevilla whole, which is the feedback we've heard from them specifically and generally about neighborhoods, and then the lack of objection from the Jade District folks as well. So I'll just put that on your radar as well.
Got that noted. And probably Commissioner Manjarres. I think you might be the one to close us out.
Great. Just a final request. I do think, yes, tomorrow that all makes sense. I think focusing on those big questions makes a lot of sense. I think getting some sort of straw poll early on and then figuring out how we move through that process is going to be really helpful. And would just recommend to Commissioner Chisholm the same outreach that you did to Apano on that specific change. I would like that data and information from folks in the Southeast District as well. So if we're going to have this conversation about two different approaches and we're going to be making these tweaks, if we could have some data to support that from those particular folks in the same way that the Apano feedback just came through, I think that would help me make informed decisions through this process.
We've gotten a lot of feedback from folks in Selwood and Buckman Currents. And of course, it's contradictory. So,
and Commissioner Manjarres, were you saying like let's focus in on that specific feedback that we've gotten through the process over the last?
I'm talking about any tweaks that are being made. So we're not talking about the feedback folks gave on the specific maps because we went through that process and people did give conflicting testimony. But if we're going to make other changes, we've, for example, just referred to Maple 4, Alder 3, one of the two. If we're going to make those tweaks, it would be helpful to get feedback from those communities on those particular changes. That would be helpful for me in making a decision. So that's my request going into that conversation. Is that clear?
On changes you've already discussed tonight, or
any changes you're going to make
for
the map for tomorrow?
Any new changes from what you've seen so far today?
From what any changes, again, there's some that are not controversial. We talked about this for the Northeast area, for example, getting more information from the planning committee. But if there are going to be changes from what folks already gave feedback on to what we're going to be reviewing tomorrow in the two different maps, and we're in a situation where we're going to make a decision between one of the two maps, I would like to have feedback from the impacted communities on those changes. Very similar to what was just named about that piece with Apano, if possible. Again, if folks can't do it, it's fine, but it would be nice to see that information.
Yeah, I think as Sharon and I were both sharing, the changes in Sunderland, Roseway, and Hofstra Abernathy are all the result of feedback we got from the public engagement process. So I don't know if you're asking for more.
I will say one more time. So when you were making the changes in over by the J district, it impacted what Apano had said. If we're making changes about neighborhoods in the Southeast district being actually moved into a completely different district than what they give feedback on, it would be helpful to get information from that particular neighborhood about whether it's reaching out to the neighborhood association head, whomever you have contact with there, to say, here's what I'm proposing. Do you have a perspective on this? I'm talking about the folks who are directly impacted. I feel like that would be fair for all of the folks who are impacted by the changes that are being made from the public comment engagement period to now.
I'm gonna press pause. I'll pause on this.
Thank you. One question for you, Autumn. Could you just really quickly run for us the process for, we're not voting on a final map tomorrow. We can't do that till the 16th, right? Could you
cannot-
walk us through the step?
You cannot vote on a map for the first time until August 16th at the earliest. You of course have 2 attempts to vote on a map. We also will need to kind of go through a process to eliminate maps, especially as we start to get onto that, like, especially if we need to go to a second vote. We need to actually eliminate the map so that's very, very clear for the record what we're voting on. So that if, for instance, that second vote fails and it goes to the council, it is very clear what the council is considering as the final map. So for tomorrow's meeting, I did drop it in the chat, but we've allocated about 50 minutes towards the top of the meeting to just review. Someone said, like, do this conversation again, but I think it's like kind of getting folks up to speed on kind of the two revised iterations, what you wrestled with today, where you'd still like the rest of the group to weigh in on, but also like just discussing kind of like, here's where we landed, and then taking about up to an hour, 45 minutes or so to, like, once we kind of agree on how we want to approach this, right? If you're getting the sense like we can arrive at some consensus, or we'd like to focus on one specific one and really drill down into that, we'll use that hour and 45 minutes to really get into it. And live mapping is probably going to be tough with a full group with 13 folks. But I think what we can do is we can kind of have those core questions prepared to really be able to zero in and wrestle with some of the decisions, like wrestle with certain configurations. I see a thumbs up from Alex from a live mapping standpoint. That's how we use the hour and 45. And so theoretically from that, so from tomorrow's meeting, if there needs to be another work group, for instance, if you'd like to go into the August 16th meeting with a map to vote on, you may be able to get to that kind of one general map for consideration tomorrow. You may need another working group to kind of get down to one map. But if you have 2 maps on the 16th, you will need a process to determine which map. We will need a process to determine which map is going to come to a vote. And so really the next meeting to 2 meetings need to be focused even more intentionally on continuing to coalesce.
Thank you. Very helpful.
All right, so folks, I hate when this happens. We are 12 minutes over. I've kept you from all kinds of good food, I'm sure. I've kept your dogs from eating your full dinners. That's rude. All right, we're going to adjourn for now, or we're going to adjourn for this meeting, and then I'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you all.
Thank you.